Thank you. I don't have a picture show for you, and I think we'll pick up some time here. I focused primarily on the fine particulate. I don't need to tell you how about the health risks of fine particulate. They've been covered earlier. The US EPA actually did a favor for us by did the modeling of fugitive dust, which is the dust that will be kicked up by the trucks primarily as they come in and out of the facility along 190 First Street. For some reason, BNSF didn't do that, so EPA stepped into the breach, and what they found was a violation of the air quality standard for PM 2.5 and PM 10, which were defined earlier, all along 190 First Street. In some cases, they were quite extraordinary exceedances of the air quality standard. The Corps of Engineers went ahead and approved this proposed environmental assessment based on a promise from BNSF to put in a single monitor, air quality monitor, at an unspecified location. And I was kind of mystified because I have never seen a health risk assessment or an environmental assessment where modeling shows an exceedance of the national air quality standard and they go forward. Normally what you would have happen is everything comes to a halt, they go back to the drawing board and redesign out this problem. Well, they didn't do this, and it all hangs on this one monitor, and they don't say where it's going to be, and it's only one monitor. So I went and read a little bit further, and I found, I think, the basis for this, and that is that BNSF is disputing the EPA's modeling. They like their modeling, but not the EPA's modeling. And what they're doing is they try to compare, they challenge the EPA's model results by pointing to a PM10 monitor at 724 Troost Avenue, which is in downtown Kansas City, Missouri. That's right where I-35 cuts through the bluff and goes down the Paseo Bridge. So I went down there and looked at that and found that that I-35 is recessed about 50 feet below the monitor right there. It's way up on, the monitor's way up here. Highway's down here. The highway is north-south orientation, which are the prevailing winds, which means that almost no particles are ever going to get to this monitor because they're going to all be funneled north to south, and they're going to be much lower. There'll be some get up there. So for them to try to point to this one particular monitor to prove that because there were so many trucks going to be going by there, that somehow it's going to be okay here, is totally inappropriate to use that monitor. So I went on then to look at some of the other assumptions that were used in the model. For example, I found 4 major deficiencies in their model. One is that they did not account for the pollution from I-35, which comes within 1/2 mile of the logistics park. And they might argue, well, we didn't do that because it's considered background over there. Well, I checked into that. That argument would fail on 3 grounds. First of all, the monitors they use to establish what background concentration, which is already out there, are all in residential areas where there's no diesel trucks. They're not immediately downwind of a major freeway. Secondly, a sizable portion of the truck traffic that'll be on I-35 just to the southeast of the site are going to be there because of the site itself. In other words, they're going to be drawn there by the location of that site. They didn't take into account the emissions from those trucks as they come into the area and get off on the ramps. Well, you know good and well, 2,000 to 4,000 trucks per day, that there's going to be trucks lined up on the get off there on the ramps, idling and stopping and starting. And you know what happens when a diesel engine starts, a big puff of stuff comes out. Thirdly, the exceedances the EPA found along 191st Street go all the way to I-35. So all the pollution from I-35 is going to overlap the exceedances in the air quality standards. So there's no basis for them not to take into account the close proximity of I-35. Secondly, they did a dispersion model of diesel exhaust, and then came up with the conclusion that their concentrations of diesel exhaust in the area would be 4.7 micrograms cubic meter, which is less than 5.0. In other words, it's right at the limit of the EPA's reference level for non-cancer health risk. And I've determined that that risk is inaccurate because they left out, in addition to the emissions from I-35 that they left out, they also left, remember all that fugitive dust that the EPA said was going to violate the standard? Well, a part of that fugitive dust comes from all that facility, all that particles from the day before and the day before and the day before that fall out and then they get resuspended. So they left out all of that old diesel particulate that is going to be just as toxic because the chemicals that condense onto these particles through the combustion process are going to stay there. They're refractory, meaning they don't break down very fast. So that's a major deficiency, a super major deficiency in this modeling. Thirdly, they had a peaking factor, which means on the 24-hour basis, they had to figure out how much the load or the traffic would go up and down on a daily basis. And they used Argentine, they just used Argentine history as the basis for this peaking factor, which was 1.378, which means 37% more on any one day. Well, the reason they're moving from Argentine is because it's full up, which means there'd be a very small peaking factor by necessity. They don't have the capacity. This new one, when it's built, is going to have all this excess capacity to begin with, so they can bring twice as many trucks in there if they want to in any one particular day. That's another problem. And perhaps the most serious deficiency, in my opinion, is that they're saying that 2010 is going to be the worst case, that after that, the new diesel engine rules that apply to all the trucks from the model year 2007 and forward, that the old fleet of trucks is going to turn over to new, cleaner diesel engines. So I went back and looked at the model they used, and they project this decline in emissions beyond 2010, a rather heavy decline. I looked at the default of the model, it's called Mobile 6, and found that this projection is based on 1995 truck sales data and a growth rate of 2% per year. Well, we know what's happening now. In the first place, it's very old data. We are now in one of the most severe recessions we've had since the Great Depression. And there is an extreme incentive for truck owners right now to not buy new equipment. So I went to wahoo.com and looked at the financial statements of some of the major truck manufacturers and engine manufacturers and found indeed their sales are off 30 and 40%. Now, part of that would be because of the recession, but I know from long experience in the environmental field that when you change a regulation like that you have to have a cleaner engine that raises the cost substantially, people keep that old equipment going as long as they can, and we know the history of that. So in my opinion, they have a hopelessly over-optimistic projection of how fast the old truck fleet is going to turn over and be retired. And that's really one of their basic what they're hanging their hat on. So my conclusions are that the air quality analysis is seriously flawed. The Corps of Engineers should require BNSF to correct the above cited deficiencies and conduct a health risk assessment as part of a full environmental impact statement. A health risk assessment would likely demonstrate a threat to the health of the neighbors and employees of the facility from fine particulate matter. An extensive multi-point air monitoring plan should be formulated and subjected to public review. Just off the